Toledo, Spain, deemed as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO, was founded over 2,000 years ago by the Roman Empire. As Christianity spread, many in Spain converted to this fast-growing religion. However, far before the Roman conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, Jews arrived in Spain in 970 BCE, and this small community continued to live and thrive despite periodic persecution. After the fall of the Roman Empire in CE 476, the Suevi, Vandals, and Alans entered Spain, but they were defeated by the Visigoths, who, by the end of the 6th century, had occupied virtually the whole of the peninsula. During this turbulent and uncertain time, it was Christianity that held people together. At the beginning of the 8th century, the Arabs entered from the south. Tariq ibn Ziyad led a Muslim army into Spain and marched his way into the capital city of Toledo, where the Jews of the city, who had been openly oppressed by their Christian countrymen, opened the gates and allowed the Muslims to conquer the country swiftly. Islamic Spain was hailed for its convivencia, its spirit of tolerance in which Jews, Christians, and Muslims created a pre-modern Renaissance. Cordoba in the 10th century was a center of commerce and scholarship. Arabic was a conduit between classical knowledge and nascent Western science and philosophy. The coexistence of the three religions allowed for direct cultural exchange in all of Spain, specifically in Toledo. And while evidence of this diffusion remains a prevalent aspect of Toledo's sights and sounds, the encounters between Jews, Christians, and Muslims left a dark legacy of intolerance and violence. Toledo, known as a city of three cultures, remains a beacon of exchange for a time long past. Its cultural tapestry was formed by the coexistence and struggles of Arabs, Christians, and Jews. The early Muslim encounter brought tolerance, which permitted the exchange of Christian, Jewish, and Moorish cultures in the city for 300 years. Finally, in 1085, King Alfonso VI, a Catholic king, conquered the city, but despite the change of leadership, these cultures continued to exist and flourish for several centuries. There are few things as unique to the region as flamenco. Their distinct guitar, passionately sung songs, and the heart-pounding, rapid, and emotionally expressive dance are actually the product of Arab cultural influences, touching everything from the style of the performance to the very rhythms and scales of the songs themselves. This style of dance began in Al-Andalus, when Muslim rule was in decline, but had existed for centuries. Scholars agree that flamenco's influences include the music of Andalusian folk traditions, Sephardic Jews, Indians, and the Moors. It is a fusion of Spanish and Arab traditions that is both exciting and inspirational. The term flamenco, which has Arab etymology, came into use in the 14th century and was first applied to Andalusian gypsies themselves, who were called either gitanos or flamencos. In Toledo, this cross-pollinated art has become a mainstay of traditional Spanish entertainment. Another custom in Toledo is the production of marzipan, whose origin dates back to the Arabic conquest of the city. Spain already had extensive fields of almonds when the Muslims arrived, but sugar, the other essential ingredient, was still missing. Within 50 years of the Muslim conquest, fields of sugarcane sprang up in southern Spain. By the 11th century, marzipan had become the specialty of Toledo, and it has been the delight of the connoisseurs ever since. Toledo also became a significant educational center as a result of its Muslim encounter during the Middle Ages. In the 13th century, the Christian ruler Alfonso X established a translation center. Here, Arabic works of astronomy, mathematics, medicine, botany, and other fields were rendered into Latin. Jewish interpreters who knew Arabic and were themselves familiar with the major Islamic works on medicine, astronomy, and philosophy played a vital role in translating works into Latin. In fact, most of the scholars in Toledo were Spanish Europeans who had assimilated into Muslim culture. Toledo became one of the major points of intellectual exchange from Islamic civilization to Europe, sowing the seeds for the Renaissance. Toledo also has been long praised for its metalwork, particularly steel blades and other arms. Expert craftsmen produced these items in a style clearly reflecting Islamic origins. As the Spaniards explored the new innovations that the Umayyad introduced, they began to produce jewelry and other articles of gold and black metal using damasquinos, a technique of pruning gold into thin strings and binding it onto a template. Likewise, the urban structure of Toledo is Arab, with its narrow, winding streets, its houses reminiscent of the Umayyad courtyards. Buildings and infrastructure throughout the city display an exploration of Islamic style and artistry. In fact, the wheel on the banks of the Tagus is an inheritance of Muslim irrigation techniques. The most obvious legacy is the Moorish aesthetics in architecture and decoration, with the use of brick and masonry, interlocking various arches in the wooden ceilings and rich plasterwork. These architectural features were used for centuries in all types of buildings, including the cathedrals. The most desired style at the time of the Islamic rule would be the Mudéjar design, which was produced by the Moors. A 10th century mosque, now known as Cristo de la Luz, illustrates the brickwork artistry so typical of Muslim craftsmen. It stands in the Medina area of the city, where wealthy Muslims used to live, though later transformed into Catholic churches. Two medieval synagogues remain. Santa Maria la Blanca is the oldest, and its interior, like the mosque, has ornate multiple columns. A more spacious synagogue, El Tránsito, now houses a Sephardic museum of Jewish culture. Many Jewish synagogues also featured pine cones, which were an Arab design. Toledo's main export became a blue tile that was designed by the Arabs. The production of it unleashed a new craze for the rest of Spain. It was used in castles, churches, and homes to the wealthiest of nobles. Business flourished in the city as Jews, who had been the leaders of commerce, were able to teach Christian Spaniards business techniques. Although cultural and intellectual pluralism between Christians, Muslims, and Jews thrived in Islamic Spain, the coexistence of the three groups often ended in conflict. Because religion was such a vital role in the daily lives of every person in the city, many could not happily swallow the fact that they were living next to someone who did not share the same beliefs. For 700 years, the three faiths created a divide amongst the civilians in Toledo, where Catholics, Jews, and Muslims lived according to their own laws and customs. This is most exhibited by the placement of the Jewish quarter. The Jews, who made up 1/3 of the city's population, were allowed to live anywhere in Spain, but they believed it would be the safest to live in a secluded area. In the Jewish quarter, there were synagogues, and on the cobblestone grounds you could find placements of tiles, as shown, that represented their faith. These tiles had words of hope and belief written on them.
The Jewish quarter was in the west side of the city, and they decided to live there because it was more safe for them. They were sometimes attacked, so living together they had more possibilities to survive. And this is why, well, they were getting a kind of quarter only for them. But they have the license to live wherever they want to.
Although it would seem that the encounters between the people of the three faiths represent religious tolerance, Andalusian governance was also based on a religious tribal model. Christians and Jews who shared Abrahamic roots had the status of dhimmis, alien minorities. They rose high but remained second-class citizens. One 11th century legal text called them members of the Devil's Party. They were subject to special taxes and often dress codes. Toledo, however, was unique in that these restrictions and differences did not erupt into horrible violence that had plagued other cities in Spain, such as Granada. But religious tolerance came to an end during the 14th century when thousands of Jewish citizens perished in religious pogroms. By the time Columbus discovered America, the Spanish Inquisition had set up a tribunal in Toledo, and both Jews and Muslims had to choose between forcible conversion or exile. The legacy of this cultural exchange is both an exploration of assimilation and an encounter with religious barriers that were difficult to breach. Toledo eventually, like many other Spanish cities, found it impossible to share its space, although co-opted the culture and made it uniquely their own. The story of Toledo and their encounter with tolerance has not crossed time, and while traditions of the past have prevailed, the sense of multiculturalism has been lost.